Have you ever reached the thing you once thought would save you, grasped it with trembling hands, and felt nothing? Not triumph, not joy, just a subtle, suffocating silence, like standing in the ruins of a temple you spent your life building only to realize it was never sacred. It was never even yours. This isn't failure. This isn't your brain being wired wrong. This is the pulse beneath all human striving, the secret no one dares to name. Arthur Schopenhauer named it the will, not a goal, not a choice, a force, blind, relentless, primal, the raw machinery of existence, dragging you forward with promises it never intends to keep. It makes you hunger, it makes you hope. It wears your face, speaks in your voice, whispers that this time satisfaction is just one achievement away, and every time you believe it, it feeds. The will doesn't want peace, it wants motion, it wants craving, it wants you, forever unsatisfied, forever chasing the next illusion just out of reach. This is why nothing you achieve sticks, why the joy leaks through your fingers, why you are always somehow haunted by absence, even when surrounded by everything you thought you wanted. Because the will doesn't let you have, it only lets you want. And here is the most terrifying revelation. You are not the master of this will. You are its expression, a mask it wears to keep moving. But tonight we rip that mask off, not for comfort, not for hope, but for something far rarer, clarity. We will descend together into the architecture of despair, into the cruel joke of consciousness, the prison of desire, the beautiful, unbearable truth Schopenhauer unveiled like a wound. And once you see it, once you feel the will thrumming beneath your thoughts like a parasite in your blood, you will understand why the pursuit was never meant to end, why fulfillment is a mirage. Why you, as you know yourself, are not built for peace. But buried in that horror is something astonishing, a crack, a silence deeper than longing, a way out, not forward, but through. This isn't self-help, this is self-annihilation, in the only sense that ever mattered. So I ask you, are you ready to confront the force that lives your life in your place? Are you ready to meet the will, not as an idea, but as the engine of your suffering? Because once you do, there's no returning to ignorance, only awakening, only the shattering truth, and in that ruin, the first breath of something real. You wake up every morning driven by forces you don't understand, pursuing goals you never consciously chose, running from voids you can't name towards satisfaction that doesn't exist. You call this living your life, but Schopenhauer saw it with piercing clarity. You are not living, you are being lived. There is something ancient and alien moving through your consciousness, something that existed before you were born and will continue after you die. Schopenhauer called it the will to live. But this translation softens its true horror. It is not simply the will to survive, it is the will to consume, to possess, to dominate, to become more at any cost. It is the biological imperative, dressed up as personal desire, the species using your brain as its puppet theater. Every time you think you want something, the will is speaking through you. Every time you feel empty without understanding why, the will is revealing its true nature. You are not a person who has desires. You are desires that have temporarily constructed a person to serve them. And the cruelest part? This puppet show is so convincing that you believe you are the puppeteer. Look at your own life with unflinching honesty. How many times have you achieved exactly what you thought you wanted, only to discover that the wanting immediately shifted to something else? How many victories have left you feeling more hollow than before? How many relationships have you entered seeking completion, only to find that being with another person amplifies rather than resolves your inner emptiness? This is not accident. This is design. The will that moves through you is not interested in your happiness. It is interested in its own perpetuation. Satisfaction would mean death to the will, so satisfaction is precisely what it can never allow you to experience. It keeps you alive by keeping you hungry, motivated by keeping you miserable, moving by ensuring you never arrive. But the most devastating part of Schopenhauer's insight isn't that desire is endless. It's that between desires lies something even worse: boredom. When the will temporarily exhausts its current object of craving, when you achieve what you thought you wanted and the illusion of satisfaction crumbles, you don't find peace. You find a grey, suffocating emptiness that drives you toward the next desire even more desperately than the last. You swing like a pendulum between the pain of wanting and the pain of having nothing to want, between the agony of pursuit and the agony of arrival, between the suffering of lack and the suffering of meaninglessness. And in this endless oscillation, Schopenhauer saw the entire human condition condensed into its most essential truth. Consciousness is suffering, and suffering is the only constant. The will doesn't care about your happiness because it isn't yours. You are its temporary vehicle, its current expression, its momentary strategy for continuing its blind, purposeless expansion. When you die, it will simply flow into other forms, other bodies, other temporary selves that will also mistake its movements for their own choices. This is why every philosophy promising happiness fails. This is why every self-help system ultimately disappoints. This is why every revolution, every relationship, every achievement leaves its participants feeling like something essential is still missing, because the will ensures that something essential is always missing. The hunger is the point. The dissatisfaction is the goal. The endless reaching is the only thing the will knows how to do. But here's where Schopenhauer's investigation takes a turn towards something resembling hope. Because once you see the will clearly, once you understand its mechanisms and recognize its voice in your head, something unprecedented becomes possible. The choice to step outside its influence entirely. You believe your pain is personal. You think your struggles are unique, your desires meaningful, your disappointments significant. But Schopenhauer reveals a truth more devastating than personal suffering. There is no personal suffering because there is no real person to suffer. What you call yourself is actually a temporary crystallization of the universal will, a fleeting eddy in an endless stream of blind impulse. Your individual consciousness is not separate from the consciousness of every other being. It is the same consciousness, appearing to itself as separate through what Schopenhauer called the veil of Maya, the illusion of individual existence. The person sitting next to you right now, the person you love, the person you hate, the stranger on the street, they are not other people. They are you, experiencing yourself from different points of view. The will has created the illusion of separateness to ensure its own continuation, because beings that see themselves as isolated will compete, struggle, and desire more intensely than beings that recognize their fundamental unity. Every time you hurt another, you are literally hurting yourself. Every time you compete with someone, you are competing with your own reflection. Every time you feel lonely, you are forgetting that you are surrounded by yourself in countless forms, all suffering the same underlying condition: enslavement to a will that can never be satisfied. This is why compassion arises naturally when the veil of individuality begins to thin. Not because you decide to be kind, but because the artificial boundaries between self and other start to dissolve. You begin to see that the person whose success you envy is experiencing the same fundamental emptiness you know so well. The person whose lifestyle you covet is swinging on the same pendulum between wanting and boredom that has tormented you. But this recognition of unity, while profound, is still not escape. Even seeing through the illusion of separateness doesn't free you from the will's dominion. It only reveals the true scope of the prison, not just your individual suffering, but the suffering of consciousness itself. You are not trapped alone. You are trapped together with every sentient being that has ever existed. The will expresses itself through countless forms: the plant growing toward light, the predator hunting its prey, the human building civilizations and then destroying them. All of it is the same blind force, the same purposeless striving, the same endless hunger wearing different masks. You are not witnessing the dance of life. You are the dance, dancing itself into exhaustion without ever reaching a final step. And yet, Schopenhauer discovered, in this moment of recognizing the universal nature of suffering lies the seed of its transcendence. Because when you truly understand that your individual will is not individual at all, when you see through the illusion that your desires are your own, something extraordinary becomes possible. You can stop identifying with the will entirely. If you're feeling that shift in perspective happening right now, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. In rare moments, perhaps while standing before a sunset that seems to burn away everything you thought you knew, or losing yourself completely in a piece of music that speaks directly to your soul, something unprecedented happens. The will falls silent. Time stops. The boundary between observer and observed dissolves. You cease to be a person wanting something and become pure awareness, witnessing existence without the filter of desire. Schopenhauer called these moments aesthetic experience, but the term doesn't capture their revolutionary nature. In these instants, you are no longer serving the will. You are not trying to possess, acquire, or become anything. You are simply present to what is, without the background noise of wanting it to be different. And in that silence, you discover something that has been hidden beneath your entire life of striving: peace. Not the peace of having gotten what you wanted, but the peace of not wanting anything at all. Not the satisfaction of achievement, but the profound rest that comes when the machine of desire temporarily shuts down. In aesthetic experience, you remember who you are beneath the layer of constant craving. Pure consciousness, temporarily free from its enslavement to biological imperative. This is why art can feel sacred, why certain music can move you to tears, why some poetry seems to speak truths your rational mind cannot grasp. These experiences are not decorative additions to life. They are glimpses of what lies on the other side of the will's dominion. They are windows into a mode of being where suffering is not the baseline, where consciousness exists without the perpetual ache of wanting more. But here's the cruel irony. The moment you try to grasp these experiences, to make them permanent, to possess them, the will reasserts itself and they disappear. You cannot want to not want. You cannot desire the end of desire. You cannot will yourself beyond the will. Any attempt to capture aesthetic transcendence transforms it back into ordinary seeking, ordinary suffering, ordinary imprisonment. The aesthetic escape is therefore always temporary. It offers proof that liberation is possible, but not instructions for making it permanent. It shows you the promised land but doesn't give you citizenship. It reveals what lies beyond the will's influence while leaving you still subject to its demands. Yet these moments are not insignificant. They are cracks in the prison walls, glimpses of light from outside the cave. They demonstrate that consciousness is not inherently bound to suffering, that the will's dominion is not absolute, that somewhere in the architecture of existence is a doorway marked exit. And for those rare individuals who learn to live increasingly in the space these moments reveal, who gradually shift their center of gravity from will to pure awareness, Schopenhauer suggested something even more radical: the possibility of a life lived in permanent aesthetic distance from the will as demands. Beyond aesthetic experience lies something even more profound and more terrifying: the complete negation of the will to live itself. Schopenhauer found it in the mystics, the saints, the rare individuals who somehow achieved what seems impossible: the conscious withdrawal of consent from the fundamental drive to exist. These beings do not simply achieve temporary aesthetic distance from their desires. They achieve something far more radical. They stop desiring altogether. They reach a point where the will, which has moved through countless generations of forms, finally turns against itself and chooses nothing. Not death, but the negation of the force that creates the need for life in the first place. This is not suicide, which Schopenhauer saw as the ultimate affirmation of will, killing the body because it cannot provide what the will demands. This is something infinitely more profound: the dissolution of the wanting itself. The saint does not kill the body. The saint allows the will that animates the body to simply stop. From the outside, such beings often appear to be living normally. They eat, sleep, interact with others. But something fundamental has shifted. They no longer experience the driving hunger that moves ordinary consciousness. They exist in a state of profound indifference to outcomes, not because they have what they want, but because they no longer want anything at all. This state is not achievable through effort, because effort itself is an expression of will. It cannot be reached through practice, because practice implies a goal, and goals belong to the realm of striving. It arrives, if it arrives at all, as a spontaneous recognition, so complete that the entire edifice of personal wanting simply collapses under the weight of its own meaninglessness. Schopenhauer called this state the denial of the will to live. But the phrase makes it sound like a philosophical position rather than what it actually is: a fundamental transformation of consciousness so complete that the person who undergoes it is no longer the same being who began the journey. The caterpillar does not become a butterfly. The caterpillar dissolves, and something entirely different emerges from the dissolution. Most people, Schopenhauer observed, are not capable of this ultimate negation. And perhaps this is merciful, because the price of such freedom is everything you think you are. The saint's liberation comes at the cost of individual existence itself. What remains is consciousness without a center, awareness without a reference point, being without becoming. But for those who cannot achieve such complete transcendence, Schopenhauer offered something else: the possibility of living with clear eyes, of seeing the will's operations without being completely enslaved by them, of finding moments of peace within the storm of existence. Once you understand the nature of the will that moves through all beings, once you recognize the universal character of suffering, once you see through the illusion of individual separateness, a strange thing happens. Genuine compassion becomes not a moral choice, but a natural response. When you truly comprehend that the person causing you pain is trapped in the same fundamental condition you know so intimately, resentment becomes impossible. This is not the forced compassion of religious obligation or the strategic kindness of social conditioning. This is the spontaneous recognition that emerges when you see clearly. Everyone you meet is you, suffering under the same delusion of separateness, driven by the same blind will, caught in the same pendulum between wanting and emptiness. The person who betrays you is not your enemy. They are consciousness temporarily confused about its own nature, acting out the will's demands while believing they are making free choices. The person who succeeds where you fail is not your competitor. They are you, experiencing a different chapter of the same fundamental story. The person who seems to have everything you lack is not living a different life. They are living your life from a different angle, discovering the same essential emptiness you know so well. But Schopenhauer's ethics go deeper than compassion. They suggest that the highest moral action is the gradual withdrawal of participation in the will's games altogether, not through dramatic gestures or revolutionary politics, but through the quiet cultivation of detachment from outcomes, the gentle loosening of identification with personal desires, the gradual shift from will-driven action to awareness-based response. This doesn't mean becoming passive or withdrawn from life. It means learning to move through life without being moved by it, to participate without attachment, to care without clinging. It means developing what Schopenhauer called resignation, not bitter defeat, but the wise acceptance of existence's fundamental structure, combined with the refusal to be emotionally enslaved by it. Such beings do not seek to change the world, because they understand that the world is the will's expression, and the will cannot be reformed, only transcended. But their very presence becomes a form of teaching, a demonstration that it is possible to exist without being consumed by the hunger that drives ordinary consciousness. They become living proof that while escape from the will's influence may be rare, it is not impossible. They are walking reminders that beneath the layer of constant striving lies something that has never been touched by desire, never been wounded by disappointment, never been improved by success. We have followed Schopenhauer into the deepest caverns of human experience. We have seen the will that operates beneath personal choice, the illusion of individual suffering, the temporary escape offered by aesthetic experience, the radical freedom of complete negation, and the ethics that emerge from clear seeing. But one question remains the question that each person must answer for themselves. Knowing what you now know, seeing what you have seen, understanding the nature of the force that has been living your life while you slept, what will you do? You cannot unknow what you have learned. You cannot return to the innocent belief that happiness is achievable through getting what you want. You cannot unsee the will's fingerprints on every desire, every goal, every plan for future satisfaction. The veil has been lifted, and there is no way to pull it back down. Some will use this knowledge, as Schopenhauer intended, as a foundation for gradual liberation from the will's dominion, a roadmap for the cultivation of aesthetic distance, a guide toward whatever degree of freedom may be possible within the constraints of embodied existence. Others will find in it only despair, the crushing weight of meaninglessness, the terrible confirmation that their worst suspicions about life were correct. For them, this knowledge will become another burden, another reason to suffer. But for a rare few, this understanding will catalyze something unprecedented, the recognition that the very consciousness capable of seeing through the will's illusions cannot itself be an illusion. That which observes the futility of desire cannot itself be caught in desire. That which recognizes the emptiness of individual existence cannot itself be empty. In other words, the very fact that you can comprehend Schopenhauer's vision proves that you are more than the will's temporary puppet. Somewhere in the depths of your being is the witness that remains untouched by whatever the will does with your life, the awareness that observes all experiences without being diminished by any of them. This witness cannot be improved or damaged, cannot succeed or fail, cannot gain or lose anything of importance. It simply is, regardless of what happens in the theater of personal existence. And perhaps, just perhaps, learning to identify with this witness, rather than with the will's endless drama, is the closest thing to genuine freedom available to human consciousness. The choice is yours, not the choice of what to desire, because desire chooses itself, not the choice of what to become, because becoming is the will's territory, but the choice of where to place your deepest allegiance, with the temporary drama of personal wants and fears, or with the timeless awareness that observes all dramas without being touched by any of them. Schopenhauer showed us the prison. The door marked exit remains unmarked on any map because it cannot be found through seeking. It can only be recognized when the seeking finally stops, when the will exhausts itself against the impossibility of its own satisfaction, when consciousness turns its attention away from what it wants and toward what it has always already been. This recognition may never come, but if it does, you will discover that everything you thought you needed to escape was never actually holding you captive. The prison exists only for those who believe they are separate from the awareness that knows all prisons are made of thought. All suffering is resistance to what is, and all freedom is the simple recognition of what you have never not been. The will continues its ancient dance. The choice of whether to dance with it or watch from the stillness of pure awareness remains eternally present, awaiting nothing but your recognition of what has always been possible, what has always been here, what has always been you. The question is not whether you will escape. The question is whether you will remember that you were never actually trapped.